You have ultimate responsibility for your experience. What you experience, who you are, it's your responsibility. There's no one else who's going to fix it for you.
Richard Gere has been on a spiritual journey for the past 30 years. Alongside his Hollywood film career, he is a committed Buddhist. In this film, he explains his Buddhist faith. He shows how a man in the most public and glamorous profession of all lives by the disciplines of one of the most personally demanding of religions.
Making a film can be incredibly frustrating. You're under enormous pressure, financial, time, everything else. Cameras in your face, you know, for 3 or 4 months. You don't get any sleep. Everyone else is under pressure too. So those are situations that people can continually be blowing up, getting crazy, getting hysterical. So it's those times in extremis that you really find out who you are.
Please welcome to the podium, Richard Gere, right up there. Come on, Richard.
If I could only be like Richard Gere. But as we said, you know, it's the same. I'm living the same problems as everybody else. This superficially, you know, it seems like I've got it knocked. But I'm still dealing with anger and hatred and jealousy and the rest of it. Basic ignorance.
And Richard Gere isn't the only one to discover that Buddhism can help people cope with these kinds of issues. After being locked in Asia for 2,500 years, it's now attracting Western celebrities.
It's so unusual to meet something which actually asks you what you think and actually helps you to think for yourself, rather than telling you what to think.
I did grow up a Christian. And I can say that my own explorations of Christianity, I found it to be incredibly compassionate. My parents were very compassionate people. But when you ask kind of difficult questions about the origin of the universe, about the nature of the self, which are basically philosophical / psychological concepts you're dealing with, there didn't seem to be a basis for discussion in Christianity.
Buddhism doesn't give simplistic answers. And I think anyone who is dissatisfied with the answers that we get from many of the more common religions, particularly from Christianity, where you get answers to the question, well, you go to heaven and, you know, God cares about you and so on. People who are dissatisfied with that, or who are dissatisfied with the glib New Age answers, well, you know, put this crystal under your pillow, or say these words, or take this herbal remedy. People who are dissatisfied with that will find in Buddhism something completely different.
Buddhism is not likely to have simple, general answers because it's a faith based on individual experience and responsibility.
I'm always going to be young and happy and beautiful, right? And rich and whatever. But if you put the mirror up to your life, you say, it's not true. That's not the way it is. Now, it doesn't make me depressed. It actually makes me smile in a way because you recognize the truth of it. You go, yeah. You have ultimate responsibility for your experience. There's no one else is going to fix it for you. There's no creator God who's going to come down and make everything all right. There's no one else to plead to. You got to do the work on your mind. When you change your mind, you change. When you change your mind, the universe changes. But you're the only one who can do it. You can have help, wonderful teachers. You have the teachings of the Buddha. You have the teachings of Jesus Christ. The teachings of Muhammad. But you got to do the work. You are responsible. Which is very Western, is it not? You want to be a millionaire? You want to be a billionaire? You got to do the work. You want to learn to play the piano? You got to do the work. very Western.
I think almost all human beings question the life all the time. I'd imagine it could be in the case of, say, somebody like Richard Gere, somebody who's got a lot of wealth and has everything that we, in a sense, aspire to. Wealth, security, they seem to have everything. I think it's a bit like, well, when you get all of that, is that enough?
It's usually the people who have the most who desire the most. I'm not saying this in respect to Richard. I'm just talking in general. As we indulge our desires, we create more desire. It's a vicious circle.
Some things we love, we want, desire, and I want this cookie. I desire this cookie, and this is really going to make me happy. And it does the first bite. You know, the first cookie maybe does. The second cookie, maybe not so much. Third cook, fourth, fifth, 10th cookie, I'm going, I hate cookies. You know?
Part of the appeal of Buddhism is that it starts with the nitty-gritty frustrations and angst of 21st century life. It deals with the modern habit of being vaguely dissatisfied with everything.
The problem we have is that everything sticks to us, right? And it makes us heavy. That sound's sticking to me, you know, that's sticking, the time is sticking to me, the bum bum, it's like, and then there's this little creature inside that's going, I don't want to get stuck. I don't want to carry all this stuff around. And anger starts to come up, and frustration, and blah, blah. And then someone walks in, and you lay that frustration on them. And the waves just keep going through and around us constantly. That's samsara. That's the world of frustration and illusion.
Suffering in that sense doesn't at all mean sort of pain or the very obvious kinds of suffering like that. It means more the suffering of wanting things and it not being true, wanting things to be different, hanging on to things, that kind of suffering. You still have pain. You still have sorrow. You'd still be sad when your friend dies or your parents die or something, you know, those kind of things don't stop. But they're not all bound up in this terrible, awful knot of self-cherishing, of wanting yourself to be other than it is.
Everyone gets depressed, everyone feels frustrated, everyone gets angry, everyone gets jealous, everyone gets, I mean, all those things. The suffering of change, you know, things are really good right now, but they're going to change. Maybe in an hour things are going to fall apart and they're not going to be great anymore, you know, or you know, my marriage is great now, maybe it's going to fall apart. Suffering of change. You know, my marriage is great now, maybe it's going to fall apart. Suffering of change.
Richard Gere was born in Philadelphia in 1949, one of the post-war baby boomers. At college in Massachusetts, he studied philosophy. He was part of a generation coming to terms with new freedoms and finding the same problems, what to do with their lives.
You know, I had my serious involvement with politics when I was in college and Vietnam, in those years when everyone was really committed. And then it all kind of fell apart for all of us, and then I said, well, we're not going to be involved in this anymore. I had a kind of crisis that most people do in their early 20s, when just everything's not making sense. And this is the late 60s. There was a lot of literature that had become available then, whether it was Sufism, Dervish, Theravada Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, blah, 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 all this stuff was available. And I've spent late nights, all-night bookshops, reading books, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was Zen, actually, that attracted me originally. There was a cleanliness to the approach, kind of a Protestant approach to it, stylistically.
Buddhism stems from a man who lived 2,500 years ago in northern India, Siddhartha. because it was believed that he gained insights into the essential nature of the human condition and taught them to others. He became known as the Enlightened One, the Buddha. And Zen is one of the many offshoots from these teachings. The practice of Zen Buddhism concentrates on disciplined meditation.
First step is starting to harness your mind, tame your mind. That was the last words of the Buddha that we've been told. Tame your mind. Not destroy your mind, tame it. And tame this unruliness. This is, you know, we're a very deep ocean. We live right on the surface where all the waves are. The deeper you go, obviously, the quieter it gets. And more radiant it gets. You know, it's just all there. Quiet, deep, empty, serene, complete, boundless. You know, those are the areas and they're not, those adjectives are, you know, they're just adjectives that are symbolic, but they're not the thing. That's essentially the voyage. Now, to get from all this surface activity that we usually live in, you know, you've got to avoid a lot of icebergs, things, thoughts, impressions, habituations. We're so habituated to get past that and find other levels of consciousness, that it's not about habituation in the sense that we're habituated to the negativities that we all are. My own experience was when I started meditating is that it's not that my mind was moving faster, more thoughts were coming, or more negative things were coming. It's just that I was aware of them for the first time. So there was a lot of stuff that came up, and a lot of it unhappy, that, you know, there were tears, there was unhappiness that was coming up. A lot of stuff came up. That's part of it. It's really kind of showing up for who you are, or really seeing yourself. Ultimately, there's no place to hide anyhow. You are who you are. It doesn't matter what anyone thinks. Anyone thinks. The work you do on yourself is the important stuff.
In 1982, the event that would set the course for his off-screen life happened while Richard Gere was traveling in India. He met the Dalai Lama, the spiritual and temporal leader of the Tibetan people, and Gere has followed the Tibetan approach to Buddhism ever since.
I was fortunate enough to meet the Dalai Lama in India, and that was the path that I've remained on. He didn't know what it was. He doesn't see movies. It's not of an interest to him. But like any skillful person, but especially a skillful teacher, he's going to use his time and energy wisely. And to know who someone is, to give them something, to help them in some way, this is not what they do. So he asked his brother in Tibetan, and he said, so what does he do? He says, oh, he's an actor. I said, oh, so he looked and said, so my brother tells me you're an actor. And I know my first thought, this was, I'm talking 25 years ago. My first thought was, oh God, I don't want to talk about acting. I want to be enlightened. I want him to just go zap. So I said, yes, I'm an actor. I said, thought about it a second. I said, oh. So tell me, when you're doing this acting and you're crying and you're laughing, these things, are you really doing them? And I gave this kind of actorish answer. I said, well, if it's more believable, the acting is much better, and tears. Blah, blah. So he goes, yes, it's better if you're really doing it. And he looked at me very deep in the eyes, and he just started laughing hysterically at me. what he was doing was saying to me, don't you see the hallucination? Don't you see that even you, who are the magician in your work, making tears, making angry, making happy, making all these things, you think they're real. And it's the same with life. Making all these things, you think they're real. And it's the same with life.
Richard Gere seems to be at ease with life as both a Hollywood superstar and a committed Buddhist. His ability to look inwards is central to his faith. But Buddhists believe that the more you look inside, the less of a real self you will find.
We may have ideas of who we think we are, but we're actually just a collection of habits, habitual ways of thinking, habitual ideas of ourselves. As far as Buddhism is concerned, there is no fixed self. It's not like there is a soul going through the middle and that stays permanent and the world changes round about you. What it's saying is there's no fixed self, because we're constantly becoming, we're constantly recreating ourselves. It may look familiar because it's habitual.
Of course there's a me. Of course I exist the way I feel I exist. But if that's not true, then the whole house of cards falls apart. All of this stuff of I'm going to protect my family, my house, my country, my religion, my universe, my whatever it is, doesn't function anymore. Because there's no me to be mine about. Huh. Now when you really penetrate that and feel that, like a Buddha does, the whole universe has changed, like that. No separation, nothing to protect. You want this? Sure, take it. You want... Yeah, your happiness is mine. When you're happy, I feel it. Makes me happy. Because there's no difference. Now, I'm not talking about me in any of this. Because I'm very far away from this.
For Buddhists like Richard Gere, this generous, forgiving attitude was tested by the September 11th terrorist attack. He had to face a hostile reception when he addressed a benefit concert for relatives of the victims in New York.
There was a strangely militaristic feel in the hall, and there was, he was creeping into a kind of revenge energy, which I thought was totally missing the point of what the possibilities were inherent in the horrible things that had happened on September 11th. I think the core of something that drastic is wisdom. So instead of us collectively looking for wisdom, we started to look for revenge, and it was, to me, just totally a waste of the possibility. I really felt like these rescue workers, the cops and the firemen, they were behaving like bodhisattvas. As they went up into the towers, they didn't take a poll and say, who are the good guys here? Who are the bad guys? Who are the Jews? Who are the Muslims? Who are the Christians? Who are the Buddhists? No cats. We're not saving any cats. We're not, you know, it was everybody. They save everybody. And that's the thing that struck me, and I wanted to share with that audience. That's the thing to connect with, is that there's no distinction between the good guys and the bad guys in something like this.
Richard Gere has followed Buddhism for over 30 years. But since the mid-90s, Buddhism has struck a chord with other Westerners, including high-profile celebrities. And for Westerners, Buddhism is exotic. It comes from Asia, the favorite destination for adventurous backpackers. Its rituals can be colorful and dramatic, none more so than Tibetan Buddhism. But Buddhism only reached this high mountain kingdom more than 1,000 years after the Buddha died.
But once it got there, it stuck in the heart of the people. And the Tibetans were very, very warlike, brutal people. I mean, they were as tough as the Mongols, the Mongolians. No question about it. But Buddhism tamed them, and it stuck, and it became the center of their culture.
The old Tibet is vanished forever. My father went into Tibet in 1939. He climbed and rode a mule over the Himalayas. And what he found was basically an entire society that was frozen in time. It was a Buddhist society. It was a Buddhist society where possibly as much as a quarter of the population were either monks or nuns. There's been an idea of exoticism, of the otherness of Tibet since the first Western explorers got in there in the 17th century, because it seemed to be an inverse of Western secular values. The landscape is completely the opposite. It is untrammeled. There are no hedges, virtually no trees in large parts of it. And the sky at those altitudes takes on a different hue. And one can also see mirages because of the thinness of the air and the sharpness of the light. Creates images, perhaps wishful images of green meadows and lakes. And you get to them, and they've moved on another 10 miles.
For Tibetans, disaster struck in 1949. Troops from the People's Republic of China invaded. Their intention was to include its lands within China. They suppressed the Buddhist religion.
When the Chinese invaded in 1949, 1950, there was a pure culture, pure wisdom culture, with a radical experiment, as radical as communism was in its time. It was the radical experiment of Tibet, and how it embraced Buddhism, and how it intoxicated everything of that culture.
Eventually, the young Dalai Lama fled over the Indian border and set up a government in exile in Dharamsala. He's been there ever since. And this situation galvanized Gere into campaigning for a free Tibet, in order that the Dalai Lama could return from exile in India and restore freedom for Tibetan Buddhists in their homeland.
The situation in Tibet is continually getting worse. As I speak to refugees who escaped from Tibet into India, the stories are more horrific and more horrific every day.
Despite the world's attention, the exiled Tibetans living in Dharamsala in India still have welfare problems, and Richard Gere is no mere figurehead. He set up the Gere Foundation to help with everything from healthcare and education to housing and sanitation. He now campaigns on a variety of humanitarian issues connected to injustice throughout the world. He's particularly concerned about providing funds for women and children affected by HIV and the AIDS virus in India.
I had just about enough money to provide really good quality services for a year and a half. And I was beginning to spend sleepless nights thinking, oh God, now what? Where do I go from here? And there must have been someone up there looking down, because at that juncture is when Richard stepped in and the money came in. It gives me goosebumps to think how it happened. I cannot think of him as anything but a lifesaver at this point, you know.
but really satisfying stuff. The AIDS work we're doing, satisfying stuff. We had a meeting here the other day. We all got chills thinking that we might be able to save 1 million, 2 million, 10, 20 million people by just starting something in motion. And it's astonishing. And how small you feel. You say, what is my life? Is it really that important that I didn't get dinner tonight, or I didn't go to the movie, or I did, whatever it is. You know, and how that resonates through all the universes, resonates through time.
Richard Gere is now married for the second time to actress Carey Lowell, and they've produced his first son, Homer, now 3 years old. So it seems Richard Gere has it all. Looks, wealth, a happy family life, and millions of adoring fans.
My basic morality has not changed since I was born. I don't think that is at all. I think the tools available to me and how I interact with people certainly has changed.
You know, spiritual realization is not something that any of us can see in each other. It's something that happens so slowly, and we say that if we expect to make changes in ourselves within a month or two, we will be very disappointed. We should really look back a few years and see if we've made any changes in ourselves.
You know, 10 years ago, I don't think I could have done an interview like this, just be open with you this way. I'd have been much more protective. 15 years ago, much more protective.
His practice has re-established priorities in his life and given him a wisdom and a maturity and a sensitivity towards the world and towards life.
I get angry less. I think I have more patience now. I think those are real things. I think that my ability to get out of myself has become stronger through the practice. The energy available to do things that are of benefit to other people has increased enormously. Those are real things.
Next from the Buddhism season, The Life of the Buddha, the story of how it all began 2,500 years ago. That's on BBC Two in just a moment.